This episode is brought to you by Freaky Folklore, the podcast all about your favorite monsters and myths. Discover the history and lore of legendary creatures like the Skinwalker, Wendigo, and more, or learn about modern monsters like Siren Head and how they became viral. Listen to, follow, and rate Freaky Folklore on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcasting apps. Or go to eeriecast.com to listen now. That's EERIE cast.com. These towns are abandoned, or nearly so. But why? What makes the people of a town leave in droves? Is it fear? Is it danger? Well, let's find out. Today's episode features stories about disturbing things found in ghost towns. Enjoy, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. Or comment below with a suggestion of what kind of stories you want to hear next. Now, let's begin. Dancing in the Woods. From Lots of Turtles. La Ciudad Muerta, the City of the Dead. This was the local name for an abandoned village at the base of a small mountain range in my hometown in Mexico. It was a good mile away from where the paved roads turned to dirt, and next to impossible to access by car. No one in my family cared much to talk about it. When I was a kid, other school children would whisper about it on the playground. A story you'd hear often was that the devil lived there. Whenever darkness fell over the village, he would roam the streets, looking for unaware travelers to prey upon. Other tales involved zombies or demons occupying the town. And when the clock would strike midnight, they would leave their boarded-up shacks, living their lives and participating in a society just like our own. I remember one kid even telling me that a witch had cursed the village, causing all the people in it to shrivel up and die from old age in a matter of days, leaving it deserted and empty. When I would go tell my mother and father these tales, they would laugh, telling me that they were ridiculous. They said the village was only a temporary place where people who were mining in the mountains would gather, and when it became unprofitable, everyone occupying it left. That's what I believed for most of my young life. It made sense, and I never had any reason to question it. That's why I was very surprised when a good friend of many years who we'll call Antonio came up to me one evening, asking me if I'd ever visited that village. I said no, and asked why he was interested in an old mining town. He looked at me strangely, asking where I'd gotten the idea it was a mining town. According to him, it was once a village at around the time our town was developing, before it was abandoned without warning. He went on to tell me that it would be awesome to camp out and get drunk there. Since he was leaving right after high school, he wanted to have a fun and memorable hangout before the year ended. I told him that if I was free, I would go. He smiled, telling me he'd get a few others we both mutually knew to come with us. As the week waned on, I began to look forward to it, and I found myself wondering what exactly the village looked like now. As you might expect, the memories of the stories I'd heard as a child popped up in my mind once again. They were easily dismissed, although I was now thinking about what exactly to expect. I supposed my parents must have told me it was a mining town just to get me to shut up about the stories I was hearing. Soon enough, the end of the week rolled around. I'd lied to my parents that I would be going to a sleepover at a friend's house, rather than tell them about our plans to visit the Dead City. A few hours after school, we'd all gathered at a gas station near the north side of town. Antonio was coming out of the building holding a bag of snacks and drinks. Two people, who I'll refer to as Daniel and Maria, were with him. I recognized them both from a mutual class together. It was the middle of May, warm, with the sun pretty high up when we left. We were all carrying backpacks, mine being packed with only a sleeping bag and a little food. It soon became clear the others had brought different items when Daniel took off his bag, opening it and taking out a joint. I wasn't much of a smoker, declining it because I didn't like how it messed with my memory. The others passed it between themselves as we walked. The pathway up to the village was very strange. The road turned to dirt right away, and narrowed substantially. Only 50 feet in, it would be impossible for a car to traverse because of how tight it was. Forest surrounded the path on both sides, and though it was bright out, the dense trees still made it hard to tell exactly what was inside. We had fun talking amongst ourselves on our way up, and when I say up, I do mean up. As we got maybe a mile in, the hill sloped as it followed the guidelines of the mountains. The climb wasn't very steep, but it still added to the feeling of isolation. We arrived after maybe 45 minutes of traveling. The forest opened up into the village, which was an oval-shaped area quite big. Just in front of us sat a very primitive and decrepit adobe home, low to the ground. Its door had long since weathered out of frame, and its walls were stained a brownish black from age. I looked at it, surprised. Approaching it made me feel a sense of queasiness, and I stopped as Maria told us we should explore the rest of the village. The other homes were like the first, some smaller and some larger. There was one that seemed to have 2 levels. It sat at the far end of the village, although unlike the others, its entrance seemed to be poised to face the bordering woods, rather than the center of the village. Daniel made a remark about how it really did seem like a dead city, before lighting his second joint. I didn't want to join in, but he also took out some beer from his backpack, which was more my speed. We drank and smoked as we continued to wander around. On occasion, we'd find a discarded wrapper or beer bottles, though they all were broken down and matted brown, obviously very old. It seemed like we were all alone. As the sun began to set, all of us had a good buzz on. Antonio suggested we try to find some old sticks to use as firewood in the nearby trees, so we could camp out and eat around a fire. Daniel and I agreed, but Maria didn't. In fact, she didn't say anything. We looked at her, and she seemed to be staring off at something, distracted. Daniel got her attention, asking her what was up. She was still facing away from us, towards the largest of the structures, as she spoke. She told us she thought she had seen something moving in one of the windows, or rather holes, since whatever glass or frame had been there before was long gone. We didn't think she was serious, and it seemed she didn't know if she was either. She just shrugged it off, suggesting she may have been imagining it. Finally, she agreed to go gather some wood with us, so we headed off into the woods. She and Daniel split off to one side of the village, so Antonio and I went to the other. We ended up passing the large home Maria was looking at, and as we did, I felt my skin prickle. There was something foreboding about looking at the old structure. Antonio suggested we take a look inside and see if there really was something in there. I didn't really want to, but I was relaxed enough to follow him. We went around to the side of the house facing the woods, but we got stopped by a door. Unlike every other home in the village, this place still had its door intact. It looked to be in great condition too. It was made of a thick, black wood, which seemed out of place because of how differently colored the trees in the forest were. Without much thought, Antonio goes up to it, pulling on what appears to be the handle. He throws most of his weight into it, but despite trying both directions, it didn't budge. I suggested it was probably sunk into the frame, and he just shrugged. He moved over, looking through one of the holes in the wall. After a few seconds, he got off, telling me no one was inside. A while later, we'd found a good amount of wood and went back into the village. We brought it into the center of the clearing before noticing that there was a strange smell that wasn't there before. This smell was metallic and heavy, like how your fingers would smell if you had your hands in a pocket full of centavos, or pennies. Anyway, we piled up our branches around the center of the village, Then we grabbed a few stones and outlined the fire with them. This took us about 10 minutes. By then, Daniel and Maria still hadn't made it back yet. The sun had begun setting, and I grabbed another drink as I was starting to get a little antsy. And Antonio got sick of waiting, so he ran back into our side of the woods, grabbing a few handfuls of dead leaves, taking them back to the fire. He dropped them on top, then whipped out a lighter, igniting one of the leaves. Then it took off real fast, beginning to blaze. It wasn't bad work, considering we both had a few drinks in us. Just when I was about to ask if we should go look for the other two, we began to hear heavy footsteps from the other side of the village. Antonio and I looked over, and we saw our two friends sprinting over to us. They both skidded to a halt by the fire, but neither of them were holding any wood or anything of the sort. As we looked at them, we could tell something had happened. Maria's face was strained like she was crying, and Daniel's outfit was super dirty. He goes on to explain they were searching around for branches. When they thought they'd found enough, they were about to head back when they see someone standing in the middle of the woods. This person was between them and the village. They said whoever it was faced away from them. They called out, wondering if it was one of us. Daniel said that right as they called, the person turned around, but they still couldn't see anything. It was still pretty light out, but somehow the figure was totally dark. They could make out their clothes, but not the body. That's when they noticed the metallic smell, the same one we were smelling now. Then, without warning, the figure broke into a dead sprint running straight at them. So immediately they dropped their wood and run the other way, booking it away from the thing. Daniel said they ran a few minutes, and when they couldn't see the figure anymore, they circled back to the village. I looked at the both of them. It was obvious they were terrified. I was a little on edge too, and being surrounded by a village of old abandoned houses wasn't helping much. Antonio told everyone to chill out, saying it's probably someone messing with us. Then Maria said she wanted to leave right away, but Antonio replied that it would be dumb, because if we did leave right away, they would probably chase us through the woods on our way out. So we decided to stay. Maria was pretty angry about it and still wanted to leave, but for the most part, she was fine. We started to eat some of the food we brought along, cracking open a few more beers, just trying to relax. A few more hours passed, so it must have been close to midnight by then. That weird smell never got stronger, but it never really left either. We all fell asleep by the fire. We were all awakened by Maria screaming. We got up immediately and looked around. She was still in her sleeping bag, but she was as white as a sheet. She looked at me and everyone else before stammering that she had rolled over, opened her eyes, and saw that same black figure from before, standing right over her. She said the figure smiled at her with these pointy teeth and put its fingers to its lips, like it was telling her to be quiet. So all of us freaked out. We just watched her as she began packing her things, telling us that she was leaving right then, right there. Daniel and Antonio started to try to calm her down. I was about to do the same when I took a glance around the clearing. I took a breath, then realized something was different about the houses. I looked at them, trying to figure out what exactly it was. But then it hit me. There were lights at every house in the village now. I told this to the others, and they looked around, confused as I was. There was an old-style lantern sitting in the window cutouts of every darned house. We were all dumbstruck, wondering what was going on. A moment later, we heard the sounds of people behind us. We turned towards the path we came up on, and on either side of the woods, there were people, dozens of people in pairs. There were about 10 different pairs of men and women, the men holding lanterns, just like the ones in the windows. They were wearing charro suits, and the women were in China poblana, traditional Mexican clothes. Then they began to dance. They weren't speaking, just staring at each other as they danced. The only sound was coming from the shoes pressing on the branches and the leaves. It was almost hypnotic. We were all just staring and listening to the forest floor being stepped on, no idea what to do. Then Antonio shouted something at them. He asked them what the heck was going on. Then they all turned, cutting their movements and staring dead at him, before the lanterns just switched off. Right as that happened, all the ones in the houses behind us went off too. Our fire, now dwindling, was the only source of light remaining. Our group was quiet, wondering what we were supposed to do, when we heard a sound from the woods. We looked, and we could barely make out a black figure, just like the one they had seen before. It was skinny but tall, really darn tall, and it was taking these huge strides towards us. One of us screamed, "Run!" I'm not sure who, but we listened. We all booked it down the trail, leaving everything behind. I don't know how, but not one of us tripped on our way down, despite sprinting in the dead of night. We must have straight up ran for 15 minutes, using only a bit of moonlight to see where everybody was. When we finally hit the bottom of the hill, we chilled out, turning into more of a jog, then a walk as we neared pavement. Soon enough, we were back in town, my heart beating up into my throat and my lungs starved of air. That night, we all slept at Antonio's. We didn't touch on what happened. Instead, we all just fell asleep. When we woke up the next morning, Maria was already gone. Daniel, Antonio, and I ate, still totally avoiding discussion of the night before. Then Daniel left pretty soon after that. We had left all of our stuff up at that village. I told Antonio that, and he said we ought to go get it. He told me it'd be fine, since it was light out now. To be honest, I didn't understand how he was being so cool about it. But I decided to go with him, since I couldn't afford a new backpack, let alone a sleeping bag, anytime soon. We barely talked on the climb there, and once we made it, we were confused to see all of our stuff gone from where we'd left it. First, he suggested that an animal might have dragged it somewhere, but that didn't make sense because not one item was left behind at all. So we looked around the village a little bit. There was no evidence anything weird happened. Even that smell was gone. I remember passing by the tall house, the one that had that weird, out-of-place door that was facing the woods, before I noticed that door was gone. I called him over, and Antonio was surprised as I was. We go up and look inside, and sure enough, all of our stuff is there. We could make out the inside of the house, thanks to all the light streaming in through the window. All our bags and food and bottles were just sitting there, perfectly stacked against the wall. Antonio just shrugged at me, and so we packed it all up, only leaving our empties before we left. And we made it out just fine. We walked back to the town with all of our stuff intact, but I swear, as we were walking down the hill, I could just barely hear the rhythmic tapping and crunching of the dancing in the woods from the night before. Driving through the ghost town. From Project 32. I live a few minutes outside of town. My morning drive to work brings me through the hills and eventually to the convenience store I work 12-hour shifts at. I like the work, so no problem there. I'd been working there for 3 to 4 years when a friend of mine mentioned that the road I drive on to get there actually branches off at one point. If you take that branching road, you'll find a ghost town, he explained. Now, I love scary things, so this got my attention. My first question was why the town was abandoned. He said economical reasons, the work dried up and families moved elsewhere. According to him, though, there had been rumors for the last century that the people didn't just leave, they ran away. Supposedly, some folks believe the town to have been haunted by a demonic creature, which tormented the farmers and shop owners there. The townsfolk left steadily over the course of a decade as animals were killed. Parents soon began to fear for the lives of their children. Chills ran down my spine when I heard that. I had heard of ghost towns being abandoned due to lack of work or drought or things like that, but I'd never heard of a place where folks were basically chased out by a supernatural creature. Then again, this was over a century ago, I reminded myself. Any ideas I was having about going to see the place for myself, and possibly seeing this creature, quickly dried up. Whatever that thing had been, it was likely long gone or dead. "Looks like you want to go, huh?" My friend, Alan, must have seen the look on my face. "Absolutely. I had no idea this place even existed until now." I put out my cigarette, and I approached the back door of the building to return to my shift. "Okay then, let's go this weekend. Just drive through and check it out. Don't even have to get out of the car." I stopped and turned toward him. "Heck yeah, as long as you drive, of course." He nodded and lit another cigarette as I returned to work. That was on a Tuesday. The work week went on slowly, and every passing day had me more excited about our little weekend trip. Friday night, I was even tempted to drive through the abandoned town alone on my way home from work, but I figured it'd be more fun to experience it for the first time with Alan. After all, he admitted that he had never been there either. We could see this place for the first time at the same time. Soon, it was Saturday. That evening, I met up with Alan at the convenience store. We bought some food and drinks and piled into his car, leaving mine locked at the back of the store. Alan began to take the road that would lead me usually to home, but a few minutes into the drive, he turned to the north, down an old road I'd passed hundreds of times before, but never gave much thought into. I remember thinking, so this is the road, the one that leads to the ghost town. "It's gonna be another 2 hours, is that okay?" I was kind of caught off guard. He never told me exactly how long the trip would be to get there. 2 hours there and back would be 4 hours total of driving. Why not? It's the weekend," I replied. Still, kinda wish I knew beforehand. About an hour into the drive, the car began to sort of stutter between on and off. "Everything okay?" I asked Alan. Alan looked a bit frustrated, hammering on the accelerator repeatedly. "Yeah, it does this sometimes." After about a minute of this, the car went back to normal and we continued our drive. Another hour passed, and soon we began to see buildings in the distance. Old buildings and lodges, doors boarded up, windows busted out. There was what appeared to be an old-timey pharmacy, the only building still standing in a block of demolished structures. Closer to the center of town were buildings made of brick, and in the opposite direction of the pharmacy was rolling farmland. In the distance, I could even see a deteriorating farmhouse. It all looked to be a once beautiful place to live. A very, very small town, but cozy. Hard to believe a place like this was only a couple of hours away from my drive to and from work. "You weren't kidding," I said to Alan, staring out the window. Nope," he said, seemingly just as surprised as I was. He went on. "But this place feels wrong." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Sort of gives me bad vibes." I didn't say anything to that, but I definitely felt it too. There was this sense of oppression coming down on us as we slowly drove through, occasionally slowing down to get longer, closer looks at different buildings. As we edged closer to the other end of town, I spotted what I thought was a church. There was what looked to be a stone gargoyle sitting alone, perched at the most distant corner of the building. "Whoa," I said. "I've never actually seen gargoyle statues on buildings before. Not in real life, I mean." Alan slowed down a bit more and asked, Really? Where is it? I turned to him for a moment, then looked back over and pointed it out. But in the split second that I'd turned to him, the statue was gone. I don't see it, Alan replied. Oh crap, was all I could think to say. Oh crap, what? Alan sounded a little alarmed. Where's the statue, dude? It's gone. What? Statues don't just get up and... Suddenly the car began to rattle and stutter again. I could practically hear Alan roll his eyes as he began to repeatedly stomp on the accelerator once more. About 2 minutes later, the car shut off completely. Alan cursed out loud. No, Alan, this is the worst place your car could possibly break down. Give me a second. He began to turn the key in the ignition. The car could barely muster a growl before going quiet again. This happened about 5 times before Alan got out of the car. Where are you going? I called out. Before closing the door, he leaned his head in. Just need to check something. Well, be quick about it. This place is a little too creepy, even for me. He laughed. Gotcha. We had just passed the supposed church when the car died. I looked out the window and up at the roof of the building, waiting for Alan to be done with it. My eyes went wide. The gargoyle statue was there again, and I could have swore it was facing the other way last I saw it. Then, the thing I thought was a statue suddenly stood and crawled straight down the side of the building at an angle only a large spider should have been able to traverse. It took me a moment to remember how to breathe, but when it finally came back to me, I opened the door just enough to scream to Alan, "Get back in the car!" He ran back to the driver's door and leaned in. You okay? Why are you screaming like that? Get back in the car. We need to leave. There's something out there, Alan. Either trusting me or getting unnerved by the horror in my eyes, Alan listened. He sat back down in the seat, closed the door, and continued to try to get the car to start. What did you see? The gargoyle, it's not a statue. I swear to God, whatever it was crawled off the old church over there. Seriously? It wasn't a bird or a dog or something? He stopped for a moment and stared at me with wide eyes. Yes, I'm serious, and I don't think a dog could crawl straight down a wall like that. A few more tries at the ignition, and the car roared to life in the most beautiful way. I couldn't have been more relieved. I glanced back at the building, looking up and down for the statue-like creature, but I didn't see it. We continued to drive down the road to exit the town a little bit quicker. Thank God. This place is... Alan looked over at me and suddenly swallowed air. Then, he slammed on the gas so hard, I was thrown back into my seat. We raced down the road at dangerous speeds. Alan, what the heck are you doing? What was that about? I asked. He shook his head. He simply kept racing down the road for another half hour before finally letting up off the gas a bit. When he did finally speak, it had been quiet in the car for so long he startled me. Dude, I looked over at you and I swear to God I saw something in the tree by the road. It was about the size of a huge dog, but it didn't look anything like a bird or cat or bear or dog at all. I've never seen anything like it. Scared the heck out of me. I ain't going back there again, man. If you want to go back to that place, you'd better find a braver friend than me. Wait, you saw it too? What did it look like? Short, pointed ears, short stubby snout, bigger than me for sure. Thick hairless legs and wings. I definitely saw hairless wings. The description matched what I could make out when I saw that thing on the building, though I didn't see it up close like he did, so I had no idea it was mostly hairless or pug-nosed. When we made it back to the convenience store, our attitudes about the situation became a bit more excited. We ran inside, telling my coworkers the story of what we saw. One of them laughed and the other rolled his eyes, but both of them were asking to tag along on a future trip, something I surprisingly agreed to. Believe it or not, we've been back several other times. but we've never seen that creature again so far. I don't know why we got so lucky the first time. Or maybe we were unlucky. Part of me wants to see it again, and another part of me wants nothing to do with that ghost town.